we need to start thinking very carefully about governance of data in contracts. And that's very important from both the buying and the selling perspective. So from the buying perspective, what's going to be important is that we make sure that we can get the data that we need generated during the execution of the contract so that we can then make it available through our open data policies if that's what we're trying to do. So basically from the public buyer perspective, it's a matter of ensuring access to the information that we want to make available more broadly. Whereas from the seller's perspective or from the provider's perspective, the issue is to understand very well what data is going to be made available to whom and for what purposes, and then see if that's in line with our standard terms and conditions, or whether we want to introduce any sort of IP-based restrictions. And in that regard, it might also be interesting that the European Commission has published some recommendations in only 2 weeks ago on these sorts of issues. And once we start understanding these issues, then we will see that there are 4 main aspects that can be interesting in terms of creating a data architecture of procurement information generated during the execution of the contract. And maybe the most difficult one is to have access to that old data that I was mentioning, because everything that is forward-looking is relatively more easy to implement, as it can be created from the beginning of the contract. But everything that looks backwards is going to have usually an investment cost in trying to find information and structure it in a way that is useful. So what's going to be relevant is to maybe select specific sectors that can be important. And one that, for example, comes to mind usually is public transport, but also energy. And these are areas that are going to be probably quite important in terms of the green transition. So for any local authority that is thinking about facilitating innovation around consumption of energy or transportation, then having access to the data generated by these old contracts on energy distribution or on public transport is going to be quite challenging. So this is an area that I think is going to be important. And also think about what are those data sets that can be high value, so that those are the ones that we prioritize maybe at the national level. And again, I'm happy to take more questions or expand on any of these in the Q&A. So just some final thoughts, because I think there's just a bit of a myth about what data is and how complicated it can be, but I think in the end it boils down to mainly issues of governance. So my recommendations or my challenges that I would like the UK government to deal with, and to some extent that should be replicated at all levels of practice, is to have a very clear policy steer towards the implementation of open contracting data standards and open data for high value procurement data sets. And that's going to require, I think, very soon guidance from central government. I would also like for the information to be automatically produced. So I would like to see a change from the current systems where all of the reporting is done manually and sometimes through PDFs or other sorts of documents uploaded on webs that make it very difficult to treat, and to start thinking clearly about how this data can be exchanged through APIs. And also, I think that what we're going to need in all this process, to try to avoid excessive transparency, is to have more guidance on what information to publish, how to publish it, what not to publish, and then how to permission different tiers of access to the information depending on who needs what, and how to make that sort of more visually accessible, because the problem with that is that sometimes it's a bit overpowering. So those are the 3 challenges that I think if the UK addressed in the next few years, would clearly bring them very close to their aspirations. And this is, I think, the area where work should be put. I hope I've given you more or less a good overview. There's others that know a lot more about the technicalities of data, and if you're interested in that sort of more technical aspect or in how things can be implemented on the ground, there was a very good workshop recently run by They Buy For You, so you have the link there. It's about an hour discussion on a panel of experts, and that's quite interesting. If you're more interested in reading a bit more about these issues on the digital technologies and particularly data used for urban transportation, I've written a couple of things that you also have there. And if, on the other hand, you're concerned about issues about transparency and business secrets. There's also a few things that are written. So anyway, plenty extra material there for anybody interested. And other than that, I look forward to the Q&A now and also to staying in touch through the email. So I'll stop here, and we can then move on to the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Albert. It's really interesting because it's one of those areas, I think, unless you actually get involved and actually know what data is available, people don't know what's actually out there, I think. And lots of people talk about open data, but actually trying to find it and locate it, I think, is one of the key issues. I put something on the chat rather than a question, but is there a role for the Office for National Statistics? Because obviously they collate a lot of information, which I know they provide free of charge out to organisations and to individuals. I just wondered if is there a role in the UK for the ONS to become more involved?
I think they are quite one of the stakeholders that could get involved, but I think they would probably see it a bit of outside of their remit. So I think they probably would think about how they can make their data that they collect in open access. I think they're doing that already. But I think that the ones that should be driving this are the Government Digital Service, GDS, which are the branch of Cabinet Office in charge of the digital transformation. And they have some general guidance on how to use open data. It's just that it's not, as far as I can see, there's nothing specific for procurement in their guidance. And most of what they say is a bit generic. So, for example, they will say things about how to use open data to improve the functioning of your service. They're just thinking about any central government mainly service. And that's a bit different, because what they're thinking about is how can the public sector benefit from having that open data, and how that can maybe be used to elicit feedback from the public or things like that. I think in procurement it's a bit different, because I think in procurement, from my perspective, the bigger resistance usually to making information available, I think, comes from the fear of legal challenge. I think that's one driver why lots of authorities don't want to make information available. And the other one is maybe supplier based. So it's just a worry that it's not going to be just general information being made available, but it's just going to be the entire offer put out for everybody to see. So it's going to have a negative commercial effect. And that's what I think maybe the GDS is not in the best position to tell us what should be done. So they can, of course, advise on the technicalities of it. But otherwise, the ones that could be taking a much more active approach also is the Data Commission Service. So they function as policy advisors to the Cabinet Office. It would be a good idea to have a VPN on sort of disclosure of information and on how to integrate OCDS that is much more developed than what we have now, because we think it's very small things on, for example, the rules of confidentiality, CR, there's something around that, but it's all pretty high level and not very practical. So I think it would be good to maybe have a more practical project led by, say, GDS in cooperation with CCS, and then maybe have lots of practitioners feed in saying, well, these are actually the concerns we have on a day-to-day basis, and how can we address them?
Okay, thank you very much. If we can maybe open up to questions now. I think everybody has the ability, then unmuted, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you can actually physically raise questions as actually speak up rather than just put onto the chat. Maybe not. Let me just see if the technology may not be. Can anybody maybe just reply back on the chat to see whether you can add some things on there? Don't think audio works. Just bear with me. Let's see. Thought it was opened up for everyone, so just bear with me. Has everyone received a notification now? Just wait a second. Richard, I know that you're on the call. Obviously, you said you don't think the audio is working. Are you able to now speak up? Yes, we have somebody. Is that a question that you have, or would you like to raise a question? If you want to put a question in, you can put it under Q&A or under the chat function. Not coming through. Can you see anything, Albert?
I don't see any questions on the Q&A or on the chat.
No. Have opened it up now, so anyone should be able to, so that everybody's unmuted. Do we have any further questions? Everyone's being very quiet today because they want to get off and get their lunch.
Yeah, it's about between people and the lunch.
It is. I do actually have another question. It is a genuine question that came to me whilst when you were talking about sharing of information. You were talking a lot about bringing together information in terms of contract awards or sort of value, the contracting entity, the supplier, etc. Is there any role in the open data environment, let's just say, for things like good specifications? So there's somebody's, it's a best practice, rather than just the numbers in terms of we might understand energy, for example, energy consumption, as you mentioned. Is there a way that you think something like this could actually help to ensure that the standards are improved throughout procurement? Because it's very difficult if you try to search for anything. Everything's quite generic. It's very difficult to try and obtain some really good specifications, I would say, from experience. So I don't know what your thoughts would be on that.
So I think there's one possibility. It's not so much linked to open data links. One possibility is to make the specs also publicly available. Maybe not for everybody, but across public buyers. So again, going to the example in Ukraine, what they did there is that they have created a library of specifications for categories of supplies mainly, and some, I think there are also some basic services. And what they do there is that if a contracting authority uses the standard specification, then they can feedback whether that specification is working well or not, and if not, then it can be tweaked. So I think one of the add-ons that you could have to an electronic procurement system is this library of specs that can be useful. The other way that this has been promoted at the European level, but it's been a failure so far, was to try to create a database where the contracting authority could basically send information saying, oh, we have just procured this thing and it was innovative in this way, and this is why we think it was successful, so here's for everybody to see. The problem is that they did it only for very big infrastructure projects, and there's been no contribution to that in the 3 years it's been created. But there are some efforts to try to create those sort of databases of useful documents or best practices. And that's another area that the UK government could support. And I think there's probably some of that happening informally. You would imagine the Association of Local Authorities probably has something like that, but it's not publicly accessible as far as I know.
That's great. Thank you very much. I'm not sure we have any questions. I'm just double checking. Stephanie's saying thank you. Thank you for joining, Stephanie. If there's no questions, I just really wanted to just cover a couple of things regarding the branch. So we do have another event that's coming up on the 19th of January, which sort of ties in quite nicely, I think, to Albert's reference to Brexit, because there's a huge amount of obviously uncertainty at the moment, and what will happen after the 31st of December, I don't think any of us can say at this point in time. But we do have a session with John Holden, who works for Burgess Salmon in the Bristol office, and he's going to look at the recent developments from, I suppose, from the end of December until the 19th of January in relation to things that have changed in the public sector purchasing environment, what post-Brexit will bring, and also some practical points, I think, in terms of things to look out for, that you may not have thought about maybe if you were procuring something a few months ago. John is a great speaker. He's come along to a number of different CIPS events, and I think a number of procurement organisations previously as well. The other thing I wanted to mention is that the Gloucestershire branch are working, or going to start working closely with the West of England and the South of England branch as well, to try and share some of the webinars that we're trying to run. Obviously, with 2021, it's unlikely that we're going to be able to hold physical events, at least for probably the first part of the year anyway. So we're trying to get the schedule out for next year in terms of working together and be able to bring slightly different types of subject matters to everybody. So that's a little bit of an update around the branch itself. And the only final thing I wanted to say was thank you ever so much for everybody who's come onto the call today. Appreciate everybody's busy, and in particular wanted to thank Albert for spending his lunchtime providing an insight into this interesting subject that a lot of us probably don't know a huge amount about, and also for the links. I think at the end it's really useful for everybody to have something to sort of take away and be able to follow up on as well. So obviously, if you have any questions, you can obviously go direct to Albert's. His details are on there. If you have any questions regarding the Gloucestershire branch, you can find us on the CIPS website. It will send an automated email to us. We also have a LinkedIn page as well with the events that are coming up, and we usually share quite a few different things that we find that are of interest as well. So even if you just want to keep tabs on us and see what we're doing, please feel free to come along and join. So thank you so much, Albert. Much appreciated. Enjoy the rest of your day, everybody.
Pleasure. You too.
Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye.